Commander Jake Martinez had spent 15 years patrolling the outer rim of human space, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. The coffee mug in his hand trembled as he pressed his face against the reinforced viewport of Research Station Omega-12, watching reality bend before his eyes. The alien vessel didn't just appear, it materialized like a fever dream, its crystalline hull catching starlight and fracturing it into impossible colors that hurt to look at directly. "What the hell is that thing?" whispered Communications Officer Mike Chen, his voice barely audible over the hum of the station's life support systems. The massive structure before them defied every law of physics, Jake knew. It was beautiful and terrifying, like a cathedral made of ice and starlight, suspended in the vacuum where such things simply couldn't exist. Lieutenant Sarah Williams' fingers flew across her console, her usually calm demeanor cracking under the weight of what her instruments were telling her. "Sir, we're detecting massive thermal anomalies. Temperature readings are dropping so fast they're breaking our instruments. Whatever that thing is, it's pulling heat from space itself." Jake's blood ran cold, and not just from the readings. In his years of service, he'd encountered rogue asteroids, pirate fleets, and cosmic storms that could tear a ship apart. This was different. This felt like standing at the edge of an abyss that was staring back at you. The kind of moment that separates the living from the dead, the prepared from the doomed. "Red alert," Jake commanded, his voice steady, despite the fear clawing at his chest. "All hands to battle stations. Lock down all sections and prepare for..." The words died in his throat as the impossible happened. Their airlock system that required 3 separate authorization codes and a manual override simply cycled open. No alarms, no warnings, no emergency protocols. Just the soft hiss of atmosphere equalizing with something that shouldn't be there, and then she stepped through. The figure that emerged from the crystalline ship was tall, elegant, and composed entirely of living ice. Her skin pulsed with blue, energy that seemed to come from within, like trapped lightning in a frozen storm. Where her feet touched the metal deck, frost spread outward in intricate patterns, beautiful and deadly as a spider's web. The temperature in the corridor plummeted so fast that Jake's breath became visible, each exhalation a small cloud of vapor that hung in the suddenly frigid air. "I am Lyra," she announced, her voice carrying the ethereal quality of wind chimes. In a blizzard, each word seemed to crystallize in the air before reaching their ears. "I have come to preserve your species." Now, you might think that's when Jake should have ordered his crew to open fire. Any reasonable commander would have done exactly that. But there was something about her presence that froze more than just the air around them. It froze time itself. Suspended them all in a moment of terrible anticipation. Security Chief Bob Thompson, a man who'd survived 3 tours in the Martian conflicts and had nerves of steel, stepped forward with his hand on his weapon. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you." To stop right there, and he never finished the sentence. Lyra moved with fluid grace, her crystalline hand reaching out to touch his forehead with what looked like gentle curiosity. The effect was instantaneous and horrifying. Ice crystals raced across Bob's body like living things, spreading from the point of contact in fractal patterns that were mesmerizing and terrifying. Within seconds, he was frozen solid, his body transformed into a perfect sculpture of ice and trapped humanity. But here's what made Jake's blood turn to ice water. In his veins, Bob's eyes were still aware. Wide with terror, they tracked movement, blinked, pleaded silently for help that would never come. He was alive, conscious, and completely helpless. That's when the screaming started. The sound that erupted throughout the station wasn't just fear. It was primal terror, the kind that reaches back to humanity's earliest days, when our ancestors cowered in caves from predators they couldn't understand. Jake watched in horror as his crew, people he'd served with for years, people he'd trusted with his life, fell one by one to Lyra's touch. Engineer Kelly Rodriguez was next. She'd been running toward the emergency lockdown controls when Lyra's finger brushed her shoulder. The ice spread across her maintenance uniform, turning her into a statue mid-stride. Her tools scattered across the floor like offerings to some ancient winter god. "Run!" Jake shouted. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew the futility of it. Where could they go? The station was a closed system, a metal box floating in the void with nowhere to hide and no way to escape. They were trapped with a creature that turned living beings into art with a single touch, Dr. Lisa Parker. The station's chief medical officer tried to hide behind a bulkhead. Lyra found her anyway, her crystalline form moving with predatory grace through the corridors. When their eyes met, Lisa whispered a prayer that was cut short by ice spreading across her lips, silencing her forever while keeping her eternally. What struck Jake most was the clinical precision of it all. This wasn't rage or hatred, it was something far more disturbing. Lyra moved through the station like a collector at a museum, selecting pieces with careful consideration. She touched Communications Officer Mike Chen while he was trying to send a distress signal, preserving him at the exact moment of his desperate attempt to warn the universe. The alien moved with purpose, her ice-blue eyes scanning each human like a scientist cataloging specimens. When she touched Navigation Officer Tom Bradley, she paused to examine the frozen expression on his face. Tilting her head with what might have been curiosity or satisfaction, Jake's heart hammered against his ribs as the terrible truth dawned on him. This wasn't an invasion or an attack in any traditional sense. This was something far more sinister. They weren't being killed, were being preserved, collected, turned into living museums of human experience, forever trapped in their final moments of terror. The temperature continued to drop, and Jake realized that with each person Lyra touched, the station itself was becoming a monument to her power. Frost crept along the walls, turning familiar corridors into alien landscapes of ice and shadow. The very air seemed to thicken with cold, making each breath a struggle. As Jake backed away from the approaching figure, his mind raced through impossible calculations. 23 crew members when the shift started. Now he could count only 4 voices still screaming in the distance. The mathematics of survival were simple and terrifying. But here's what you need to understand about that moment: it wasn't just about the physical threat. It was about the complete overturning of everything humans believed about their place in the universe. We've always imagined first contact as either peaceful diplomacy or violent warfare. We never imagined this being collected like butterflies. It's preserved for purposes we couldn't even comprehend. Jake pressed himself against the bulkhead, watching Lyra's crystalline form reflect the emergency lighting in patterns that hurt too. Look it directly. She was beautiful and terrible, like a natural disaster, given consciousness and purpose. And she was heading straight for him, the question that would haunt him for the rest of his life, however long that might be, was simple. What do you do when you encounter something so far beyond human understanding that resistance seems not just futile, but meaningless? That's when he heard a sound that changed everything. From the medical bay, echoing through the frozen corridors, came the voice of someone who shouldn't exist. Someone who was still fighting, still alive, still human. Dr. Emma Collins was calling his name. Want to discover how small actions can lead to extraordinary outcomes? It's just like how one person's resistance can change the fate of an entire species. Watch. Check out my next video on the power of compounding and how tiny changes create massive results over time. Dr. Emma Collins had always been the type of person who ran toward danger instead of away from it. It's how she'd ended up on Research Station Omega-12 in the first place, studying quantum mechanics. At the edge of known space, but as she burst through the medical bay doors, her breath coming in ragged gasps that crystallized in the suddenly frigid air, she wondered if this time she'd finally bitten off more than she could chew. The sounds behind her were what nightmares were made of: screams that cut off mid-breath, the crystalline tinkling of ice forming on metal, and underneath it all, and the soft footsteps of something that shouldn't exist. Each scream that ended meant another friend, another colleague, another human being had joined Lyra's grotesque collection. The mathematics were simple and terrifying. 23 crew members when this started. And now, she could count the remaining voices on one hand. "Think, Emma, think," she muttered, her hands shaking as she frantically searched through her research files. Her fingers flew across the holographic displays, pulling up medical records, experimental data, anything that might give her an edge against something that turned living beings into ice sculptures with a touch. You know what's funny about Desperate moments. Sometimes the answer you're looking for has been staring you in the face all along. 3 years ago, Emma had been conducting what she thought was routine quantum field research. The experiment was supposed to be simple: measure quantum thermal fluctuations in controlled conditions. Instead, the containment field had failed, and she'd been exposed to a massive dose of quantum radiation that should have killed her instantly instead. It had changed her. The medical reports were all there, hidden in files she'd tried to forget. Cellular restructuring at the quantum level. Thermal regulation abilities that defied conventional biology. Her body had literally rewritten itself to survive impossible conditions. She'd thought it was just enhanced metabolism, better temperature, tolerance. She'd had no idea it was preparing her for this moment. The temperature in the medical bay plummeted as the door began to crystallize with frost. Emma watched in fascination and terror as ice crystals spread across the reinforced steel like living things, creating patterns that were beautiful and deadly. The very air seemed to thicken with cold, making each breath a visible cloud of vapor that hung in the suddenly Arctic atmosphere. Then Lyra entered, and Emma understood why ancient humans had invented concepts like angels and demons. The alien was tall, elegant, and composed entirely of living ice that pulsed with blue energy from within. Her crystalline skin caught the medical bay's emergency lighting and fractured it into impossible colors that hurt to look at directly. Where her feet touched the metal deck, frost spread outward in intricate patterns, turning the familiar medical equipment into alien sculptures. "Another specimen," Lyra said, her voice carrying the ethereal quality of wind chimes in a blizzard. Her ice-blue eyes scanned the room with alien intelligence, cataloging everything with the precision of a scientist or a collector. She moved, with fluid grace, each step deliberate and purposeful. Like a predator that had never known failure, Emma felt her heart hammering against her ribs as Lyra reached out with one elegant, deadly finger. This was it, the moment of truth. Fight-or-flight responses flooded her system, but here's the thing about being trapped in a metal box in space: there's nowhere to run. Sometimes the only choice is to stand your ground and hope you're stronger than you think you are. Emma didn't run. She couldn't. Instead, she stood her ground as the alien's hand pressed against her forehead. The familiar cold touch came, temperature dropping so fast it should have flash-frozen her blood. Emma felt the alien's power washing over her like a tide of absolute zero, trying to drain every joule of thermal energy from her body, and then it stopped. The sensation was like standing in front of a tsunami and watching it break against an invisible wall. Emma felt the cold trying to penetrate her cells, trying to lock her molecular structure in place. But her quantum-enhanced biology simply absorbed the assault and converted it into something else. Heat, energy, life. Lyra's eyes widened. The first expression of surprise Emma had seen from her. For a creature that had methodically frozen dozens of humans without breaking stride, this was clearly unprecedented. Impossible. Not impossible, Emma said, her voice steady despite the terror racing through her veins. It's just unexpected. The words came out in visible puffs of vapor, but her skin remained warm, her heart beating, her consciousness intact. She was still human, still alive, still fighting. Now, imagine being an alien who spent centuries believing your power was absolute. You've traveled across the galaxy, turning entire species into frozen museums, never encountering resistance. Then you meet one small human who stands there and basically says, "Nice try, but I'm still here." That's gotta mess with your head, right? The alien tried again, this time grasping Emma's arms with both hands. The cold intensified, becoming so severe that frost began forming on every surface in the medical bay. The air itself seemed to freeze, creating ice crystals that hung suspended like tiny diamonds. But Emma's skin remained warm, her pulse strong, her breathing steady. "What are you?" Lyra demanded, her crystalline form flickering with agitation. For the first time since she'd entered the station, the alien seemed uncertain. Perfect composure. Cracked, revealing something underneath: surprise, confusion, maybe even fear. "I'm the one who's going to stop you," Emma replied, though she had no idea how. The words came out with more confidence than she felt, but sometimes bluffing is the only card you have left to play. She could feel the alien's power washing over her like waves against a seawall, trying to find a weakness, a crack in her defenses. But here's what Emma understood that Lyra didn't: survival isn't just about being stronger than your opponent. Sometimes it's about being different enough that their weapons simply don't work. The quantum radiation that had nearly killed her 3 years ago had turned her into something unprecedented. Human who could exist in multiple thermal states simultaneously. Lyra stepped back, her form shimmering with what might have been frustration or curiosity. You are not like the others. Your thermal signature is ... complex. Layered. How is this possible? Emma seized the moment of uncertainty. You want to know what makes humans special? We adapt. We survive. We find ways to overcome things that should be impossible. She took a step forward, and incredibly, the alien took a step back. You think you're collecting us, preserving us, but you're missing the point entirely. The alien's crystalline features shifted, revealing something that might have been interest. Explain. You're not preserving humanity, Emma said, her voice growing stronger. You're preserving death. Fear. The moment when hope dies. But that's not what makes us human. Lyra's form flickered with energy, her ice blue eyes narrowing. Then what does? Emma felt the weight of the moment settling around them. In the distance, she could hear the last few screams cutting off, which meant they were running out of time. Whatever she said next would determine not just her fate, but possibly the fate of her entire species. What makes us human is what happens after the fear, Emma said. What we do when everything seems impossible. How we choose to fight even when we know we might lose. The alien tilted her head, studying Emma with renewed interest. You speak of choice, but you have no choice. You are alone, surrounded by my power with nowhere to run. You're right, Emma said. And then she smiled, the first genuine expression of confidence she'd felt since this nightmare began. I can't run. I can't hide. I can't overpower you. But I can do something you never expected. What? I can offer you something better than what you're taking. Lyra's form solidified, her attention completely focused on Emma now. What could you possibly offer me? Emma took another step forward, and this time the alien didn't retreat. The one thing you're really looking for. It's the thing you think you'll find in all these frozen bodies but never will.
Ouch.
Which is hope. The word hung in the air between them, like a challenge, and Emma realized she'd just made the most important proposition of her life. The question was, would an alien who'd spent centuries collecting death be interested in learning about life? The answer would determine whether humanity's first contact with an alien species would end in extinction or evolution, and Emma was betting everything on the possibility that even creatures made of ice could learn to choose warmth over cold, curious about how small changes can lead to massive transformations. Just like how one person's unique adaptation can change the course of history. Check out my next video on the power of compounding and discover how tiny adjustments create extraordinary results over time. Sometimes the most dangerous enemies aren't the ones who hate you, they're the ones who need you. Emma Collins stood in the frozen medical bay, watching Lyra's crystalline form with the calculating eye of a scientist who'd spent her career reading between the lines of impossible data. The alien's posture, the way she held herself, the methodical precision of her actions, none of it screamed conquest or domination. It screamed something far more terrifying, desperation. You're not a conqueror, Emma said, her voice cutting through the Arctic air like a blade. She studied Lyra's alien features, noting the tension in the creature's stance, the way her ice-blue eyes darted between Emma and the frozen humans throughout the station. You're desperate. The effect was immediate and telling. Lyra's form solidified, her defensive posture confirming Emma's guess more effectively than any confession. The alien's crystalline skin flickered with what might have been surprise or annoyance. But underneath it, Emma could see something else: vulnerability. You understand nothing, human. But Emma had spent 3 years studying quantum mechanics, learning to see patterns that others missed, connections that existed in the spaces between obvious truths. She'd survived radiation exposure that should have killed her by adapting in ways that shouldn't be possible. If anyone could read the signs of a species in trouble, it was her. I understand desperation when I see it, Emma said, taking a step closer despite every survival instinct screaming at her to run. The frost spreading across the walls intensified, creating patterns that looked less like random ice crystals and more like desperate scratches, marks left by someone trying to claw their way out of an impossible situation. US, you're preserving us, like specimens in a museum. The question is, why? You know what's fascinating about intelligent beings? No matter how alien they are, they all have tells. Lyra's tell was silence, the kind of pause that comes when someone realizes they've been seen through completely. The silence stretched between them like a glacier, cold and vast and filled with the weight of unspoken truths. Finally, Lyra spoke, and for the first time since she'd entered the station, her voice cracked with emotion. My people, cry RCHS. We are the last generation. Our evolution into thermal beings was flawed. We cannot reproduce, cannot adapt. We have perhaps 50 years before extinction. Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature plummeting around them. Extinction. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. And suddenly the frozen humans throughout the station took on a different meaning. They weren't trophies or conquests. They were desperate attempts at salvation by a species that had painted itself into an evolutionary corner. So you're collecting other species? Emma asked, her scientific mind racing through the implications. How many worlds had Lyra visited? How many civilizations had been turned into frozen museums in the name of cryarch survival? We hope to learn from them, Lyra said, her form flickering with pain that was visible even through her crystalline exterior, to find a way to reverse our transformation.
Oh.
But none have been compatible with our nature. Their thermal signatures simply cease when we touch them. Think about that for a moment. An entire species wandering the galaxy, touching other forms of life and watching them die, hoping each time that this contact would be different. This time, they'd find the key to their survival, instead of adding another corpse to their collection. The futility of it was heartbreaking and terrifying. In equal measure, until now, Emma said, understanding dawning like a cold sunrise. The quantum radiation that had nearly killed her 3 years ago hadn't just changed her hit, had made her into something unprecedented. A bridge between thermal states, a being who could exist in conditions that should be mutually exclusive. Until now, Lyra confirmed, her eyes blazing with desperate hope that was somehow more frightening than her earlier cold detachment. You represent something we thought impossible, being who can exist in both thermal states. You could be the key to our survival. And there it was, the moment when Emma realized she wasn't just facing an alien threat. She was facing an entire species' last hope. The weight of that realization hit her like a physical blow because she understood what it meant. Lyra wasn't going to let her go. Couldn't let her go. When you're facing extinction, morality becomes a luxury you can't afford. Emma backed away, anger flaring in her chest like a furnace. So you'll experiment on me? Turn me into another frozen trophy? The rage felt good, clean, easier to deal with than the complex emotions swirling around the situation. Here was a clear villain, a simple choice between right and wrong. Except, it wasn't simple at all. I will do whatever's necessary, Lyra said, her voice turning cold as absolute zero. The temperature in the room plummeted further, and Emma realized she was no longer facing the uncertain alien who'd been surprised by her resistance. This was Lyra without pretense, without hope for cooperation. This was a creature with nothing left to lose. My species will not die. The frost on the walls began forming into shapes, sharp, angular, weapon-like. The very air seemed to crystallize around them, turning the medical bay into a frozen battlefield. Emma felt her quantum-enhanced cells working overtime to maintain her body temperature, but she could sense the limits of her adaptation. Lyra wasn't just desperate, she was powerful beyond human comprehension. You know what's funny about extinction? Emma said, her voice steady, despite the fear racing through her veins. It makes monsters out of anyone. You probably started as explorers, didn't you? Scientists like me, looking for knowledge and understanding. Then you realized you were dying, and suddenly exploration became collection. Science became desperation. Lyra's form flickered with what might have been recognition. You speak as if you understand. I understand more than you think, Emma said.
Nice.
I understand that you're not evil. You're just scared. Scared enough to turn innocent people into ice sculptures. Scared enough to justify genocide in the name of survival. But here's what you don't. Understand fear makes terrible decisions. The alien's crystalline features shifted, revealing something that might have been curiosity. What would you have me do? Allow my people to fade into extinction while yours flourishes? I'd have you. Consider that maybe there's a third option, Emma said, her scientific mind working furiously. Maybe the answer isn't preserving other species or sacrificing your own. Maybe it's evolution. Evolution? Lyra's voice carried a note of bitter laughter. We evolved ourselves into a dead end. We are living ice, beautiful and perfect and sterile. We cannot change further, can't you? Emma asked. And then she did something that surprised them both. She reached out her hand toward the alien. You've been trying to preserve other species to save your own. But what if instead of taking from us, you learned to share with us? Lyra stared at the offered hand with something approaching wonder. Share. You can touch me without killing me, Emma said. That means we can exchange thermal energy instead of you just taking it. Maybe the answer isn't reversing your evolution, maybe it's completing it. The alien's form shimmered with possibility. And Emma realized she'd just proposed something that could change the course of two species forever. The question was, would a creature driven by millennia of desperate isolation be able to choose? Trust over fear? The answer would determine whether humanity's first contact with an alien species would end in mutual destruction or mutual evolution. And Emma was betting everything on the possibility that even beings made of ice could learn to choose cooperation over conquest, ready to discover how small partnerships can create exponential growth, just like how two different species can evolve together to overcome impossible challenges. Check out my next video on the power of compounding and see how tiny collaborations lead to extraordinary transformations over time. Sometimes the most dangerous moment in any negotiation is when words stop working and survival instincts take over. Emma Collins had spent her career solving problems with logic and scientific method. But standing in that frozen medical bay, watching Lyra's crystalline form shift from desperate hope to cold calculation, she realized some situations only have one language violence? You want to survive? Emma snarled, her breath forming ice crystals in the air that hung between them like tiny diamonds of rage. The temperature had dropped so far that her words crystallized before they could reach the alien's ears. Then you'll have to do better than murder innocent people. The effect was immediate and explosive. Lyra's form blazed with crystalline fury, her ice-blue skin pulsing with energy that made the air itself seem to crack. For a creature that had maintained perfect composure while systematically freezing an entire space station, Emma's words had clearly struck a nerve. Innocent. Lyra's voice carried the sharp edge of breaking glass. Your species wages war across the galaxy, destroys entire planets for resources, enslaves others for profit. We are preserving the best of you before you destroy yourselves completely. Now here's where things get interesting. You'd think being lectured about morality by someone who'd just turned your friends into ice sculptures would be laughable. Emma could hear the genuine conviction in Lyra's voice. The twisted logic that had allowed an entire species to justify genocide in the name of preservation. It was the most terrifying kind of evil, the kind that believes it's doing good by killing us. Emma's quantum-enhanced cells flared with heat, creating a thermal barrier around her body that turned the air shimmering with competing temperatures. The sensation was like standing in the eye of a thermal hurricane, with absolute zero trying to crash against the furnace of her enhanced metabolism. You're not preservers, you're parasites? That did it. The word parasites hit Lyra like a physical blow, and whatever restraint she'd been maintaining shattered like ice in a furnace. The alien lunged forward, her ice form moving with lethal grace that defied every law of physics Emma thought she understood. It was like watching a glacier decide to become a missile, impossible, beautiful, and absolutely terrifying. Emma dodged. her enhanced reflexes barely keeping her ahead of those deadly fingers. You know what's funny about having quantum-enhanced reflexes? They work great until you realize you're fighting something that's had millions of years to perfect the art of killing. Every surface Lyra touched became a weapon of ice walls sprouted. Razor-sharp spikes, floors became treacherous skating rinks, and the ceiling began forming stalactites that dropped like frozen spears. The medical bay transformed into a frozen death trap in seconds. Equipment that had been designed to save lives became sculptures of ice and metal. The diagnostic bed where Emma had saved countless patients became a crystalline monument to futility. Even the air itself seemed to turn hostile, each breath burning, her lungs with cold that felt like swallowing liquid nitrogen. "You cannot run forever," Lyra hissed, ice spears forming from the air itself with casual ease. The alien's voice had lost all pretense of civility, becoming something primal and hungry. "I will have what I need from you." Emma grabbed a plasma cutter from the medical equipment, its beam hissing as it met the frozen air. The tool had been designed for precision surgery, but desperate times call for creative solutions. You want to know what makes humans special? We don't give up, we don't surrender. And we sure as hell don't let monsters like you win. The plasma beam carved through Lyra's ice constructs like a lightsaber through butter, sending up clouds of superheated steam that filled the medical bay with fog. For a moment, Emma felt a surge of hope maybe she could actually fight this thing. Maybe human ingenuity could overcome alien power. But then Lyra laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane, and Emma realized she was fighting a creature with millions of years of evolution behind her. The alien was already adapting, her form shifting to avoid the heat, creating new ice constructs faster than Emma could destroy them. It was like playing chess against a supercomputer. Every move Emma made was anticipated, countered, and turned. Against her, the plasma cutter's battery indicator flashed red. Equipment designed for medical procedures wasn't built for extended combat, and Emma was burning through power faster than she could think. Meanwhile, Lyra seemed to be drawing energy from the very air around them, becoming more powerful with each passing second. That's when Emma noticed something that changed everything. Each time, Lyra reformed after Emma's attacks. She was slightly smaller. The crystalline alien was maintaining her power by converting mass to energy, and the fight was costing her more than she was letting on. "You're burning out," Emma said, dodging another ice spear that shattered against the bulkhead behind her. The revelation hit her like a lightning bolt. Lyra wasn't an unstoppable force. She was a dying species member fighting a war of attrition she couldn't win. All that power and you're still dying? Lyra's form flickered, rage and desperation warring in her alien features. The perfect composure she'd maintained while freezing the station's crew was cracking, revealing something underneath that was almost ... human. Fear, desperation, the terrible knowledge that even victory might not be enough. "Then I will take what I need," Lyra snarled, but Emma could hear the exhaustion in her voice. The alien was running on empty, using the last of her strength to maintain her assault. It was like watching a dying star burn through its final fuel spectacular. Terrifying and ultimately finite, Emma felt her own strength flagging. Her quantum-enhanced cells were working overtime to maintain her body temperature. But she could sense the limits of her adaptation. The plasma cutter was almost dead, her reflexes were slowing, and the medical bay was becoming more hostile with each passing second. But here's the thing about humans. We're at our most dangerous when we're cornered. Emma looked around the frozen medical bay, at the equipment that had been turned into weapons, at the alien who was literally burning herself out to claim victory, and she realized something that changed everything. This wasn't a fight between human and alien. This was a fight between two species that were both running out of time. Lyra was dying, her species was dying, and Emma was the last hope for both of them. The question wasn't who would win, it was whether they could both survive long enough. To find a better solution, Emma dropped the plasma cutter and did something that surprised them both. She stopped running. "You're right," she said, her voice carrying across the frozen battlefield. "You will take what you need from me, but not the way you think." Lyra paused, her ice spears hovering in the air like frozen question marks. "What? You need to survive?" So do I. So does my species. So maybe it's time we stopped fighting each other and started fighting the real problem. The alien's form shimmered. With confusion, which is, Emma smiled, even though her lips were numb with cold. The fact that we're both too stubborn to admit we need each other. And with that, she extended her hand toward the creature that had just spent 10 minutes trying to kill her. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is offer trust to someone who's given you every reason not to. The question was, would a dying alien choose cooperation over conquest? The answer would determine whether humanity's first contact would end in mutual destruction or mutual salvation. Want to discover how seemingly impossible partnerships can create exponential results? It's just like how two opposing forces can combine to overcome any obstacle? Check out my next video on the power of compounding and see how unlikely alliances lead to extraordinary breakthroughs over time. Sometimes the most pivotal moments in history happen when someone chooses trust over fear, hope over desperation, and cooperation over conquest. Emma Collins found herself pressed against the frozen bulkhead of the medical bay, Lyra's crystalline form towering above her like a glacier of pure rage.
Oh.
The alien had transformed from desperate negotiator to apex predator, her ice-blue eyes blazing with the fury of a dying species that had run out of options. Ice spears hovered in the air around Emma like frozen lightning, each one positioned with surgical precision. They weren't aimed to kill, they were designed to pin her down, to turn her into a specimen that could be studied, dissected, and ultimately consumed in the name of cryarch survival. The temperature had dropped so low that Emma's breath came out in crystalline clouds, each exhalation a visible reminder of how close she was to joining her frozen crewmates. But here's what separates humans from every other species in the galaxy. We have this annoying habit of finding hope in hopeless situations. Even when cornered by a creature that could turn her into an ice sculpture with a thought, Emma's scientific mind was still working, still calculating possibilities, still searching for that one variable that could change everything. "It doesn't have to be this way," Emma said, her voice cutting through the alien's fury like a plasma torch through ice. The words came out steady despite the terror racing through her veins, each syllable carrying the weight of two species. "Futures, you think you need to take from us. But what if I told you there was another way?" The effect was immediate. Lyra hesitated, her perfect predatory focus wavering for the first time since the battle began. The ice spears that had been poised to strike suddenly trembled in the air, their crystalline surfaces reflecting the uncertainty in their creator's mind. "What are you suggesting? You know what's fascinating about moments of crisis? They reveal who we really are beneath all the pretense and social conditioning." Emma could have begged for her life, could have offered to sacrifice her crew to save herself, could have tried to bargain with a creature that held all the cards. Instead, she chose something that was either brilliant or completely insane. "Partnership," Emma said, slowly rising to her feet with her hands raised peacefully. The gesture was deliberately non-threatening, but it carried a power that weapons couldn't match: the power of possibility. "My quantum adaptation, it's not just resistance to your power, it's compatibility. I can exist in both thermal states, just like you need to." The words hung in the frozen air between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. Lyra's crystalline form flickered with what might have been hope, but Emma could see the alien fighting against centuries of isolation and desperation. When you've spent millennia believing that survival means conquest, the concept of mutual benefit becomes almost incomprehensible. "You would help us?" Lyra's voice was barely a whisper, carrying the fragile hope of a species that had forgotten what cooperation felt like. The ice spears wavered further, their deadly points drooping like flowers in the face of an unexpected spring. "I would help you save your species without destroying mine," Emma said, extending her hand in a gesture that was part invitation, part challenge, and part leap of faith. "But first, you unfreeze my people. All of them." Imagine being in Lyra's position. You're a member of a dying species. You've just found the first being in the galaxy who might hold the key to your survival. And she's asking you to give up your only advantage. It's like being offered a life preserver while you're drowning. But first, you have to let go of the rock you're clinging to. Lyra stared at the offered hand. Centuries of isolation and desperation warring with hope in her alien features. The crystalline patterns on her skin shifted and changed, reflecting the internal battle being fought on a cellular level. "If you betray me, I won't," Emma interrupted, her voice firm with the kind of conviction that can only come from someone who's betting everything on a single moment. "But I need proof you can change, that you can choose cooperation over conquest." For a long moment that felt like an eternity, the alien stood frozen not from cold, but from the weight of decision. Emma could see the calculations running behind. Those ice-blue eyes, the risk assessment of a species that had learned to view every other form of life as either resource or threat. This was the moment when everything would change, when the future would be determined by a single choice. Then, slowly, like ice melting in spring sunlight, Lyra reached out and touched Emma's hand. The effect was immediate and transformative. Instead of the familiar thermal drain that had turned dozens of humans into ice sculptures, there was something unprecedented thermal exchange. Emma felt the serene peace of absolute zero flowing through her consciousness, while Lyra experienced warmth for the first time in millennia. Their quantum signatures merged, creating something new and impossible, a bridge between two forms of life that shouldn't be able to coexist. "It's working," Lyra whispered, wonder replacing rage in her voice. The ice spears dissolved into mist, the frozen weapons of war becoming clouds of possibility. "I can feel ... warmth. Not just temperature, but ... life. Hope, is this what you call friendship?" "It's just the beginning," Emma said, her hand still joined with the alien's crystalline fingers. "Now show me you can be better than what you've been." And that's when something miraculous happened. One by one, Lyra began to thaw the frozen humans throughout the station. Commander Jake Martinez gasped as warmth returned to his body, his eyes wide with amazement as consciousness flooded back into limbs that had been locked in ice. Lieutenant Sarah Williams stumbled forward, alive and breathing, her hands touching her face in wonder. Security Chief Bob Thompson flexed his fingers, marveling at the sensation of movement after being trapped in crystalline stillness. "This is impossible," Jake breathed, staring at Emma and Lyra standing together in the center of the medical bay. The sight should have been terrifying Hammond and alien. Warm-blooded and crystalline, natural enemies joined an impossible alliance. Emma said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd just rewritten the rules of first contact. "This is evolution. This is what happens when two species choose to lift each other up instead of tear each other down." Lyra's form shimmered with new possibility, her crystalline skin taking on colors that hadn't existed moments before. Warm blues mixed with the cold ones, creating patterns that spoke of hope instead of desperation. "My people, they will not believe this, then we'll show them," Emma said, and in those 4 words, she committed humanity to its greatest adventure. Together, the two beings stood united. The frost began to melt from the walls of Research Station Omega 12. The facility that had been moments away from becoming a frozen tomb was transforming into something unprecedented. The first embassy between thermal and quantum life. The future stretched before them, no longer frozen in time, but alive with infinite possibility. The last great question of first contact hadn't been answered with weapons or conquest, but with the simple recognition that survival is always easier when you're not trying to do it alone. Emma Collins and Lyra had just proven that even the most impossible differences can become the foundation for the most extraordinary partnerships. Ready to discover how impossible partnerships can create exponential growth, just like how two completely different species can combine their strengths to overcome any challenge? Check out my next video on the power of compounding and see how unlikely alliances lead to extraordinary breakthroughs that change everything.